Good day and welcome to the 9th annual ASC and Healthcare Management Virtual Symposium. During this session, we're going to talk about shifting your perspective and using technology to expand operation. This session is sponsored by Medicus IT. My name is Tim Hebert. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer for Medicus IT. Personally, a little bit about me. I've been in the IT industry now for over 40 years. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I started 22 businesses. Most of those businesses have been in the IT space. I ran a business from 1987 to 2016. That was an IT services company. We grew it from a spare bedroom in my business partner's home to a $170 million operation with 300 employees. For the last 5 years, I've been working with Medicus IT, focusing specifically in healthcare IT. And I'm here today to share with you our perspective on how do you change perspective around how IT can impact your business. I want to talk about, before we jump into the meat of this conversation, I want to talk about business leadership versus IT leadership. As we move forward over the course of the next 5 to 10 years, there's a couple of things that are definitely going to happen. IT or technology is going to be more pervasive in all of our operations. It's a given. We're seeing it happen. There's no going back. The days of paper filing systems are gone. Everyone's going to be on some kind of electronic medical system if they're not already there today. We're going to be using technology in ways that we've never, ever envisioned or imagined it to be used in delivering patient care and improving patient outcomes. So that's a given. The second thing that's going to happen, I think that's a given that we all have to look at, the rate of change is increasing ever so rapidly. And there are many factors driving that, which we'll explore during this presentation, but the rate of change is only going to increase. So our ability to adapt and respond quickly and with the agility we need to move forward is paramount. So I want to share a story with you that starts off on September 11th. September 11th, 2001, I was a young business leader. I'd been in the business, running my own business for about a decade. We were about a $12 million a year business with 53 employees. During September 11th in the morning, I was in a business meeting and someone knocked on the door and said, "Hey, Tim, a plane just flew into the World Trade Center." And I'm thinking a Cessna flew into the World Trade Center. That seemed to be, there was some kind of reports of some small airplane, flying into some building in New York City in the news every other month or so. So I don't think anything about it. A few minutes later, a second knock comes to my door. And another person walks in and says, "Hey, Tim, another plane just flew into the World Trade Center." At this point in time, I knew that something was different. I got up from my desk. I walked into our command center. In our command center, we had a 12-inch black and white TV set. And on that black and white TV set, I saw what unfolded. I think most of us that are listening to this call, that's participating in this virtual symposium, remember exactly what we were doing on September 11th, exactly at the time that those planes hit the World Trade Center. I think all of us knew at that moment that our world was changing, and we had no idea what it was changing to. As a business owner, I had 53 employees. That meant I had 53 families that depended on my business to survive through these unknown times that were going to certainly lay ahead of us. I was responsible for 53, families essentially, and their lives and their livelihoods. To compound this, at pre-September 11th, the IT industry in the United States of America was going through a recession. We had just gone through the Y2K boom and bust. We've gone through the dot-com boom and bust. And there was a layoff occurring about every day, and about 1,000 people a day were being laid off in the IT industry. And this has been going on for 2 or 3 months prior to September 11th. I knew that no matter what happened after September 11th, that rate was going to continue. There's going to be more layoffs. It was going to be harder for my employees if I didn't do things correctly to be able to survive. So like most people on that day, I went home in a daze. And as I was driving home, I'm thinking to myself, as a business leader, I have to do something. I have to be proactive. I have to be able to adjust quickly. But I had no idea what I needed to do. So after a lot of soul searching that night, I realized number one is that I had to reach out to my employees, because I knew that if I was feeling this way, they were feeling that way as well. And I need to be able to give them a message to say, this is what we're going to do to survive. But like most people at this point in time, I had no answers. There was no book written about what to do when planes fly into the World Trade Center on September 11th, manuals that you could refer to. So I basically devised over the night, I devised a plan that was a very, very simple 4-step plan The next morning, I met with my team. I basically talked about my uncertainty. I didn't know where things were going, but I basically told my team I just couldn't sit by and wait to see what was going to happen. We needed to act now. We needed to take action. And I outlined my 4-step plan. We put that plan into execution that day, and we executed that plan exactly as we defined it for 18 months. Now, during this next 18 months, it was pretty interesting because between that, September 11th and the next 18 months, 65% of my industry went out of business, physically gone. At one point in time, the IT industry was laying off between 5,000 to 10,000 people a day. The problem only got worse for us. As we know, the global economy went into a recession, the US economy was into recession, people being laid off, people that were being laid off from work were out of work for anywhere from 12 to 24 months, trying to find new employment. Many times people had to change careers. So it was a very substantial portion. Now, we executed that plan that I put together. We responded quickly to the industry drivers that we said, the micro drivers that we saw, the macro drivers that we saw. We responded to those and we put a plan into play and we made some adjustments quickly. And as we made those adjustments, we watched what we did and we made further adjustments, constantly refining what we were doing. Over those same next 18 months, where 65% of my competition went out of business, my company not only survived, not only did I protect the lives of the families of those 53 employees that worked for me, we thrived. We were able to double in size. So in 18 months, I went from a $12 million a year business to almost 25 million with over 100 employees. And that was on the start of us becoming a powerhouse in our industry. With this, our plan that we put in place allowed us to create a competitive advantage. And as we sit here and we look at this organization, I hope you can take away from here our need to be competitive in this space and to create that advantage for us. We need to be able to do that. When I look at competitive advantages, there's a great article by Harvard Business Review that talks about creating this competitive advantage and what that is. They basically talk about the ability to adapt, to recognize the triggers and signals that are out there that can create change for our space, for our industry, for our businesses, to be able to look at those external environments and be able to act quickly. And if we take the action quickly, we can reinvent our business, we can refine our business, we can evolve our business and create that competitive advantage that we need. So our ability to recognize these external drivers, this external environment is really, really important. So when I think about the healthcare industry, I think specifically with the ASC space and what's happening with healthcare management, that space is going through a major, major revolution. The space today does not look like anything it looked like 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And I guarantee the next 5 to 10 years, it will not look like it looks like today. Today, there are 5 factors that I believe that are driving kind of the healthcare industry, specifically the ASC space and the healthcare management space. The first one is the market expectations. When we look at the market expectations, there's a number of things that drive this today. If I think about it just from the consumer point of view, the patient, when a patient is working with our organizations, their expectations are different. This is the day and age where I can pick up my cell phone today, pretty much any part of the country, any part of the world for that matter, go to Amazon.com, order something and expect it to be delivered within the same day and many times within a couple of hours. That immediacy, that urgency to get access to information, to be able to do things is changing the way patients want to interface with the healthcare community. What I think is fascinating about this environment is that when we look at a patient just trying to schedule an appointment, instead of calling in, waiting on hold, going through complicated call queues and ACD functionality, what we now have is basically people going online and using a scheduling assistant to help us schedule our appointments. And if I need to reschedule, it's a matter of a couple of clicks and I'm rescheduling my appointments. Not only am I doing that, but it's synchronizing it with my calendars. So now my calendars are synchronized with in kind of a singular motion. We're becoming to expect that. So technology and with the expectations of what the patient or consumer is expecting is changing drastically. And our businesses need to evolve to be able to support those expectations as they continue to move forward. Speed and urgency and the ability to access my information is critical at this stage. The second driver is what's happening in the competitive environment. It's hard to be an independent ASC in this current environment today. If you don't have a partnership with a hospital, you're not collaborating, or you're not part of a larger organization, it's hard to compete. It's hard to stay relevant. And what you'll see is over the course of the next 5 to 10 years, that environment is going to change drastically. So we have to be able to recognize the drivers, be able to recognize the triggers that are occurring, and make our adjustments today or as they're moving forward, so that we can keep pace with what's happening tomorrow. The third driver, we really experienced this in real time. I experienced it September 11th. I experienced it again in 2020 when COVID started to rear its ugly head and we went into lockdown and all the things that happened after COVID. I know most of the people in this conference today really have experienced the whole COVID experience firsthand in the frontline trenches. You saw the impact it had on your business. You saw the impact of how you had to adjust to be able to take patients in. I remember going to some doctor's appointments with my late wife, and I remember having to be in the car, dropping her off, being in the car, waiting for them back and forth. The whole dynamics of how we engage changed drastically in a span of a couple of weeks. It seemed like. So these crises that occur, whether it's a pandemic, whether it's a natural disaster, hurricane, earthquake, superstorm, whatever those kind of things, those crises require us to adapt our business as fast as possible to be able to change to a new reality. The fourth driver are what I call threats. These are threats that come from a security perspective. Today, as much as we hate to admit it, the healthcare industry has become a target for cyber criminals. The data that we contain, the actual patient records, are the most valuable asset that's traded on the internet and the dark web today. It doesn't matter if you are a multi-billion-dollar organization or a small one-man operation, the data that you have is valuable. You are a target just by virtue of the industry that you're in. And whether or not you think that you're large enough to have an impact, all it takes is a handful of records to be taken from you and compromised to actually have a huge negative impact on your business. So the threats in the driver in the security space, and it's constantly evolving, constantly changing. As security protection measures get stronger, the bad actors get more intelligent, and they're using more automation, more artificial intelligence to help drive this. They're being more targeted in what they're doing. So we have to be more proactive, and we have to be able to recognize those signs and make the adjustments in a proactive way. The last area that we have to look at is there's constant regulatory changes happening. What we have to be required to be effective in a business, to protect patient information, to deliver the healthcare that's required across our nation in compliance with everything else. Now, this compliance can come down from government regulations, but can also come down to the way we get compensated for the work that we do. All these things come together to drive and change the way our business operates. This is really important because what happens is if we look at this chart here, we basically look at the change of pace. So we look at how fast things are changing. And I think we all agree, every day that goes by, every moment that goes by, the rate of change is happening faster and faster and faster. And it's not just in our businesses, it's in all aspects of our lives that this rate of change is occurring. As this rate of change is accelerating, what used to take us a decade to be able to go through from one point to the inception, where we implement something, we maximize the life cycle out of it, and then we change to something new. It used to be 7 to 10 to 12 years. Today, we're seeing that time frame being compressed down to 18 months to 36 months of this rate of change that's occurring within our business place. And as we become more global, as we become more online connected, more digitally savvy, more digitally oriented as organizations, the faster that rate of change is going to occur, the greater the expectations across our competitive environments, our markets, our security threat landscape, all those are going to change with this. So this driver, if I was to graph this, it shows almost this hockey stick approach where the industry drivers are going to continue moving us up into to the right as fast as possible. This is where the industry is going. For us to be relevant, we need to be able to try to keep pace with this. We need to stay on this teal line. But unfortunately, what happens is depending on how we recognize the change, you'll see this orange is when we recognize a trigger and we start to research solutions to implement. We start doing RFPs, we start doing evaluations, we start doing reference checking, we start the implementation process. Once we made our selection, we start to roll things out. Time goes on. And what happens, if we're good, we're able to put something in place that basically allows us to keep change. So if I look at the first little orange hump that we see here, it keeps pace with the rate of change by the time I made this selection. But once we've done that, we've put that solution in place, we have to get our staff up to speed on how to use the technology. So our doctors, our nurses, our staff, our administration all need to understand how to use these tools effectively. That takes time. As we take this, it starts to shift us beyond what the industry drivers are pushing us towards. Then once we get our staff in place and our organizations aligned with this technology, then what happens is that we then need to get our end users, accustomed to the technology. I see a lot of organizations implementing some kind of client portal today. However, there's very little training, there's very little adoption that we're pushing to drive acceleration to use these portals. So even though we have it out there, the technology is not being used by our staff and facility as fast as we want it to. And then consequently, we're not training our teams to use it. I was recently, my local physician actually launched a portal about a month and a half ago. And I logged into the portal after a meeting. It took a week and a half for the information from that visit to actually be updated into my portal. So the timeliness of that information and my ability to adopt and use that have to be aligned. So all of these things push that orange line to the right in this chart. And what happens as they continue to push them to the right, we're missing where the market and industry is pushing us and we're driving where we need to be. So what ends up happening, we end up with a misalignment gap that occurs. So the orange line is our response to the change that's happening. And you can see the teal line is where the industry, where we should be. The orange is where we're actually ending up. The slower I respond, the slower I am to recognize the changes and triggers that are occurring, the less decisive I am about driving change and then making the decisions to do that. This orange line shifts. The further this orange line shifts to the right, the more impact it has on my business, on the relevancy of my business, and my ability to survive changes in the market, changes that happen because of crisis mode, because of threat landscape items, whatever the case happens to be. One of the things I think is really interesting here is that what we saw when COVID hit, within the first 6 to 9 months, we saw about a 3% of our client population go out of business. Most of those companies that went out of business I would define as laggards. They made limited investments in technology. They just did exactly what they needed to do to be compliant and to be able to say they've checked all the boxes, but technology wasn't a driving force in their business. And what happened is that when they needed to shift to a virtual environment and work remotely, a remote environment, they didn't have the systems in place to do that. And they weren't able to respond as quickly as possible. So our whole focus here is to recognize the events and be able to respond faster. It requires us to be strategic and think about our investments that we make in IT in a slightly different way. So I want to give you a concept that I've been using for about 30 years now. And I refer to this model as what I call run, grow, transform. When we think about IT investments or any investments in general, but IT investments specifically, there are 3 buckets that these investments can fall into. It can fall into what I call my run operations, the things that keep the lights on. This is paying for my internet access, for example, my telephony bills from my telephone companies. It's things like my licensing for my EMR systems. So it's all those things that just keep the lights on that I have to put in place. The second bucket is the growth. These are the activities I make investments in. And the investments across all 3 buckets fall into kind of what I would say 3 categories. First of all, it's investment of money that I'm investing cold, hard cash into technology to be able to move the business forward. The second thing is I could be putting energy in, the process of defining and researching and, bringing in people that can help us make the right decisions, to implementation, to supporting the efforts. And then the third thing, besides, our money and our energy, is the time and talent that we put into making this happen. So all those investments that we're making, those hard and soft costs, goes into the second bucket called growth. And growth is about helping the organization grow, to take on more patients, to be able to see more patients, to be able to conduct more surgeries, to be able to capture more billing revenue, to be able to expand operations. So I have more locations potentially to actually see patients in. So as we look at this, these are the growth activities that move the organization forward. Then last but not least, the third bucket is what we call transformational. These are the activities that change the nature of the business that we do. If we go and wind the clock back 15 years ago, and we think of healthcare industry as a whole industry, think about how many organizations had electronic medical record systems. We are working with companies today that will go live with their first medical record system in the next 12 to 18 months. But 10 years ago, that was the commonplace. Now it's hard pressed to find those laggards that don't have those solutions in place today that need to implement that. Think of the impact it changed our business by having that information. Now, in some cases, we'd argue putting the technology in and making that transition, had a positive and a negative impact on our business. It was different than what we were accustomed to doing. It was harder for us to do some things. But think about the amount of information we were able to collect, and now what we can do with that information. Now there's something that we can collect and can look at and analyze and make better decisions around. It can have the ability to change and transform the way we deliver healthcare to our clients. So when I look at it, our investments are across these three buckets. Now, what I have on this slide here is I have estimated percentage of that time, energy, talent, and money that I should be spending in each of these buckets. In the ideal world, the perfect world, I should be spending about 65% of my investments in the run, to keeping the lights on, making sure my users know how to use the system, making sure that when there's a problem, there's someone you can call to be able to help fix that, to be able to make sure you have as much uptime as possible. Those keeping the lights on functionality. Now, that should be about 65%, but in reality today, what we find in most organizations, they spend about 90% of their time, energy, money in this space. And this is a big number to remember. We're going to come back to this in a few seconds. The second bucket, we should be spending roughly 20% of our time focusing on moving us forward so that we're growing, we're adding more patients, we're conducting more surgeries, we're opening up more surgery centers, we're implementing new tools that allows us to bill more effectively. Whatever the case happens to be, it's allowing us to grow our business. Then the last area that we want is about 15% of our total investments to be in the transformational functions. How can we actually change the way we're doing business? And this could be implementing an EMR system for the first time. It could be upgrading that EMR system to take on new capabilities like scheduling. It could be using a technology to be able to help people schedule and remind them of appointments. It could be helping them do pre-surgery type of assessments and guidelines that they get, and dealing with post-surgery kind of check-ins and follow-ups with them. It could be completely changing the front end, the storefront for our operations. Those are the transformational operations. So in an ideal world, this is how we want to spend our time. If we are effective in doing this, then what we do is we see a rate of return, this ROI. This ROI, what we look at, is inversely proportional to the investment. So the more I invest in the run operation, the less return on investment I get for a dollar. The actual return on investment goes down. In some cases, if I spend too much time on the run operations and too much focus there, what happens is I actually get a negative return on investment. It becomes a cost center. And this is why most organizations, when they think of IT, they think of this as a cost center. They try to manage it as a cost center. They're not managing it as an investment or an asset that they need to manage and mature and move through the process, but they're managing it as a cost center, but they're trying to only cut costs. And when they get into that cost-cutting mode, then what happens, it affects the ability to deliver the effective run operation. So it kind of becomes a catch-22, where I cut because it's a cost, but then the cutting of the cost has an impact on my ability to run to the level that I need to run at. And this will affect things like performance, adoption, those kind of elements that allows us not to be as effective as we see. When I look at my growth function, for every dollar I get more than usually double my return on investment. So if I could double my capacity, open up another surgery center, I double my capacity, or have the ability to double my capacity to generate more revenue. I create a partnership with a hospital system. That allows me to bring in more surgeries into my location. Once again, it's a growth operation. I get more efficient at leveraging my fixed costs to be able to drive that forward. So anything I can do to improve growth is huge. And then the last area, the transformation, it's unbounded the amount of return on investment I can get. If I can create and secure new revenue streams that don't exist today, if I can get more efficient at how I capture the current revenue streams and drive the cost and expense out of that through better management of the process, we can do that. If I get better patient outcomes and better patient experience as the billing models change, we'd be able to capture that and have a bigger impact on our business. So when we look at this, the rate of return is inversely proportional. Most organizations look at it as only a cost. They don't look at it as an investment with a return that should be coming back from on the investment that they're making. Now, what I will say, the numbers I shared with you and the way we've talked about this is showing a static environment, but very seldom is an organization static at 65 or 90, whatever the number happens to be. What happens over time, we see an ebb and flow as things occur and change within an organization, how they make the investments. So we saw before across the customers that we deal with, about 90% of the people in 2019 were spending 90% of their time, money, and energy on the run function. Approximately 10% on the growth functions and 5% on kind of any transformational work. When COVID hit, people had to shift from run because they couldn't really run the same way they were running before, because sometimes the facilities were closed, the way they were doing business was different. They had to change that. What you saw is a shift from run, and those funds and efforts and energy were shifted towards more transformational work. And the companies that were able to do that, make that shift on the fly as they recognize industry drivers, and be able to make things like move their phone system to the cloud and be able to handle more of a, more of a ubiquitous kind of communication model with their patients. We're able to experience it. People that are able to go to telemedicine pretty quickly because of the investments that they had made and they were able to leverage them, were able to make those changes happen quickly. So they've spent about 80% more transformational side. After the COVID started to die down, now late 2021, 2022 and beyond, what we're now seeing organizations are falling back into the 65, 20, 15. We're seeing them look at how to use technology to grow the business. We see a lot of acquisitions occurring. We see a lot of collaborations with partnerships, where they're investing in those partnerships to be able to create more synergy. We see them investing in technology to actually expand their front office, to be able to create that digital storefront that we come in, to create the client portals, to be able to make access to medical records and lab results more responsive and make it more Amazon-like. So we see this happening. So in a nutshell, for us to really think about our organizations, we have to rise to the occasion to become better business leaders. Better business leaders, that means that we have to be more strategic. We have to be able to be more proactive in how we act and drive change. Instead of waiting for the opportunities, we have to seek out opportunities to make the right kind of investments in the organization. So to recap real quick, to change your perspective, to shift that perspective, shifting that perspective really is about changing the way we think of IT. I mean, the simple way I look at this is that today, most organizations look at IT as a run function, and they look at it as a cost center. We need to look at IT as an investment that's going to help me not only survive, but thrive in the uncertain market that's ahead of us, with all the change that's happening as the rate of change is increasing and speeding up. We need to be able to look at that and be more strategic and proactive around that. We have to shift that perspective from cost to an investment, in that IT and the technology that we use in our business is a transformational asset to the business, increases the value of the businesses that we're driving. The second element is that we have to become better at recognizing, reading, recognizing, and reacting to the industry drivers. There are 5 basic drivers that we have to really look at on a consistent basis. What's happening with market expectations? What do our patients expect? What do our payers expect? Where do we see the industry going? How do we stay in front of that? The second element that we have to look at is how do we keep pace with our competition and exceed that competition, create that competitive advantage that we need to create our space and maximize our value proposition that we have. The third thing that we have to look at is crises. How do we respond to crises that are coming from all over the world? We're seeing now supply chain issues. We've witnessed pandemics. We've seen natural disasters on a day-to-day basis. These events are not going to get any fewer. They're not going to slow down. We're going to be facing in more reality. Our business has to be resilient. We have to create the agility in our business to respond to those, but we have to start by recognizing those are true threats to what we're building. The fourth area that we really got to be cognitive of, and this is changing drastically. I could talk for days and weeks upon end about the security threat landscape. There are more threats trying to get access to the data that we have in our systems today. And that threat is only going to get worse. The bad actors are going to become more sophisticated. They're going to use more sophisticated tools, and they're going to be more targeted in what they do. Our ability to respond and react to those really will drive our success. Then last but not least, when we look at the drivers, it really comes down to regulatory changes that we're seeing. So the third bullet I'll leave you with is it's important for us to mind that gap between what the industry is driving for and where we need to be successful and to maintain our businesses the way we need, and where we are by the time we finally react, the actual reality. That gap, that misalignment, the larger that is, the more impact it is, and the less agile that we are, and the less strategic that we can be, and the less relevant our business becomes over time. The last but not least area here, we need to focus on growth and transformation. We have to shift our perspective from how do we run IT and the technology in our business that's moving us forward, to how do we use that technology to grow, and to how we actually transform our efforts. With that, I want to thank you for your time today. Hopefully you got a little bit of information out of this that can help you in your businesses. If you want to connect with us, our telephone number is 844-200-2195. Feel free to reach out to us and give us a call. We'd love to chat with you about what you're doing in your organization, how we can help. You can drop us an email at info@medicusit.com, or you can go to our website, check it out, www.medicusit.com. Thank you and have a great day.